Hello, everybody. Welcome into Davis Up Front from Compass Football. Jason Davis here, taking a look at a couple of the biggest stories in the beautiful game. It's two stories. That's what we do around here. We hit two stories very hard. Let's start with Tottenham manager Mauricio Pochettino. Following an FA Cup loss to Crystal Palace, Mauricio had some interesting words to say about trophies in regards to Spurs, the club that he's tasked with helping win trophies. He said the club is doing fantastically. It's so successful. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've been fighting in different ways to achieve what the club needs to be on the level of Chelsea, United, City, Arsenal, or Liverpool. People wish we could win some trophies, but being realistic, we are not a team built to win titles still. It's true that this season has been tough, but to be a contender is always difficult for us. Now the realistic targets are trying to be in the top 4, to try to be close to Manchester City and Liverpool, and to reduce the gap. And another is to try to beat Dortmund in the next round. Of course, Spurs taking on Dortmund in the Champions League. Again, we're going to have to debate whether a trophy will take the club to the next level. I don't agree with it. It only builds your ego. The most important thing for Tottenham is to always be in the top 4. Here's Mauricio Pochettino saying something that is obvious to a lot of people who watch English football, that finishing in the top 4 and booking his place in the Champions League for the following season is much more important to the ambitions of a big club than, say, winning an FA Cup. So as Tottenham is knocked out of the FA Cup by lowly Crystal Palace, this is Pochettino trying to find a way to explain that's not that big of a deal. Now, this is kind of a harsh reality of the world for a club like Spurs. They want to compete with the Cities and the Uniteds and the Liverpools, but of course they haven't yet crested that hill. If this club wins an FA Cup and nothing more, as Pochettino says, does it build up the ego? Does it lead to the fans of Tottenham thinking that there's got to be something more? Or does it set the club back in some way? This is what Pochettino is effectively saying. He's saying that an FA Cup doesn't mean much anymore. That's a commentary on the FA Cup. It's also a commentary on the place of Spurs in the Premier League and in wider European football. Mauricio Pochettino said back in 2017 that he wouldn't accept 4th place for Spurs, that it was all about winning trophies, that's what he wanted to do. Now, again, this comes back to a question for the English Premier League of just how big a club can get when you are limited by your resources. Spurs has more than most, but they don't have as much as City or as much as Liverpool. So here they are trying to figure out their place in the Premier League. Can they go for a title in a good year with things breaking their way? There's a chance that Spurs could challenge for the Premier League title. But this year, with the injuries to Dele Alli and to Harry Kane and to a number of other players, Spurs are finding reality harder to deal with. For Spurs, coming into this season, if you had said that they would finish 4th and win no trophies, I'm sure the fans of Tottenham would accept that. But that says a lot about what it is to be a modern football club in a league like the Premier League. It says that winning a trophy, which is supposed to be the goal of every team, regardless of where they play, isn't good enough. Isn't that a sad commentary of where we've come as a soccer culture across the globe? That winning a trophy, an FA Cup, a Carabao Cup, whatever cup we're talking about, isn't as good as finishing 4th place? Normally, finishing 4th would be finishing behind those clubs that you're supposed to be beating, and therefore a loss on some level. But the realities of Europe and the way that modern football has trended with the money that comes in from the Champions League means that Tottenham cares more about finishing 4th than winning an FA Cup. This is similar to the way things went for Arsenal toward the end of Arsene Wenger's period there. When they won FA Cups, it was seen as an achievement, and yet everybody knew that it was weak solace for a team that wasn't competing for a Premier League title, which is where they expected to be. Further for Mauricio Pochettino, beyond those bigger questions of what this might mean about the state of being a modern football club in England, is what this might mean for his chances of moving on in the world if, say, Manchester United comes calling. With Ole Gunnar Solskjaer doing so well at Manchester United, maybe there's no reason for that club to look outside of the man they have as caretaker manager. But if they want to go somewhere else, if they want to look at Pochettino, who's certainly been talked about as a replacement for the departed Jose Mourinho, they may look at these comments from a manager whose job is to win trophies and think, hey, can we handle that? Is winning a trophy More important than fourth place, it depends on the trophy. But if you're not aiming for a trophy, you might not win the title. You might think, oh, fourth place, that's good enough for us. This is a very difficult time to be anybody but the biggest spending clubs in the world. Spending equals quality equals titles. How do you get over that hump? And when you come into a new season as a fan, are you ever thinking, hey, fourth place, that's good enough for us? If you're a fan of English football, you might be. If you're a fan of a club that has less than Spurs does, you're thinking, hey, mid-table, that'd be fine with us. Hey, if we get a Europa League spot, what a triumph for us in this season. If we avoid the relegation, if we stay up, what a triumph for us in this particular season. Now, I'm American. That seems like an odd mentality to have. But I understand that the stratification of the Premier League, the way that money has changed that league over the past 25, 30 years, and the way things are going right now for a club like Spurs, who have big aspirations, big dreams, who want to win titles, finishing fourth is good enough right now. Maybe you go make some noise in the Champions League. Maybe you attract a better quality of player because you've done something in the Champions League. Maybe you are able to spend on better players because you've brought in that revenue for the Champions League. It's just the way of the world for Mauricio Pochettino. And even though what he says is correct, it's a hard thing to process. That finishing fourth is good. Winning a trophy, not so much. Organized hooligan violence hasn't really been a thing in English football for a number of years. After a dark period during the 1980s, English football managed to stamp out much of the worst elements following the beautiful game, the firms that popped up, the casual culture that was so dominant back in Thatcher's England. But recently, an FA Cup match this past weekend, Millwall and Everton got together and their fans decided to have a brawl outside of the stadium. It was quite the scene, dozens of people involved. Deputy Commissioner for Scotland Yard, Matt Twist, said police originally sent 200 police officers for the match, but ultimately had to send in specially trained reinforcements to deal with the violence. He said, the disorder which occurred before, during, and after the Millwall versus Everton FA Cup match was some of the most shocking football violence we have seen in some time. The abhorrent behavior lasted a number of hours, involved dozens of people, and resulted in at least one serious injury. One man was taken to a hospital with a horrific life-changing injury to his face. One of our officers was also injured and now has been discharged from hospital. So, massive violence on a scale, again, not seen in a number of years. And what Twist said is that this looked like it was organized. This was firms getting together to battle it out. That kind of hooligan violence hasn't really been a thing in American soccer culture. Although American soccer culture is apt to try to copy what they see in Europe, and we certainly have a few supporters groups who have been known to get into it a little bit, some of them worse behaved than others, it hasn't been the kind of level that we saw in the 1980s in England. At least one man wants to change that. He wants to actually bring that hooligan element to the United States. His name is Derek Diablo Alvarez, and he's formed the Miami Casuals, a group in South Florida. In a story at Vice UK, Derek talks about how he would love to have all-out brawls in the style of British hooligan culture, the casual culture, in the United States. He's got a bunch of videos on YouTube where he's calling out British firms, where he's talking about being tough. He went through a number of different elements of the culture before he got to this place. And he said in this article, I went through a few different lifestyles before I arrived at being a Miami casual. I got in deep with anti-racist skinhead gangs. I was in a hardcore crew called FSU. I was also the president of Florida Sharp, Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice, and got into politics and joined the Communist Party. I'd taken being a skinhead as far as I could take it. The politics hadn't gone anywhere, so I decided I needed another lifestyle to move on to. Hooliganism had always been in the back of my mind, and I ended up deciding to be a Miami casual. I thought, wow, I'd be the first to represent that in the United States. I'm going to tell Derek right now that we don't need that in the United States. There's not really a place for it. And here's the other part of this. Again, mentioning Thatcher's England in the 80s and the way that the working class in Britain felt alienated and separated from the rest of culture, treated like lesser than everybody else, which gave rise to the firms and the casuals and the way things happened there. A lack of control on the part of football authorities and the police created a culture that was wholly organic to England. To try to copy that here in the United States seems stupid. It doesn't seem to fit what we've got here. Our sporting culture has never really fed into those political ideas or the type of organized violence that comes with being part of the casual culture. Now, I'm going to forgive Derek here. He seems like a lost soul. He doesn't quite seem like somebody who has a good grasp on what he wants to be in life. He's just looking for a home, and being a fit individual who apparently likes a good fight, he wants to bring casual culture to the United States. The way that American soccer culture has developed over the last 30 years might seem tame to some, and it might seem boring to others, and it might seem like it doesn't have the kind of edge that you would see in England or in Europe. But again, that's part of what makes American soccer great, is it does welcome everyone. Now, Derek is anti-racist and among other things. He should also be anti-violence, because that has no part in the beautiful game in the United States or anywhere for that matter. After the events between the Millwall and Everton fans, let's hope that those kind of things don't pop up again in England and become a regular occurrence. While those firms and some of those casuals are still out there milling about, probably trying to hold on to a lost culture, the time has passed. And although England is going through some existential crises right now, this does not seem like something that should be added to football again. Let's hope that Derek is not successful in bringing casual culture to the United States, at least not in the form of organized violence. It's one of the things he talked about in this Vice UK piece was setting up fights and actually trying to televise them, maybe even turning them into a combat sport that he could sell to Dana White. Now, if you want to have organized fights and have rules and have Dana White sell it, that's one thing. Attaching it to the beautiful game, attaching it to soccer, having that become part of what we do here, not necessary, not needed. And in a country where soccer is still struggling to find its feet, to gain popularity, no matter the growth of the game here in the last 25, 30 years, soccer is still trying to gain a foothold with the average American sports fan. With all of that said, we certainly don't want to attach violence to it. There's already a perception that soccer begets violence, that hooligans come with the territory. And every time there's an incident in the United States that even looks or sniffs like anything approaching hooliganism, there's an overreaction on the part of an ill-informed media. So why bring that upon American soccer? And I don't know whose job it is to stop Derek from turning South Florida into a haven of casuals. Maybe it's on Inter Miami and the new team to make sure that this group doesn't become attached to their team. Maybe it's just on soccer fans in general to police Derek and these events. Hopefully the police are on top of this story here, watching as Derek Diablo Alvarez and whoever else he might find attached to him in South Florida talking about creating some sort of lifestyle in Florida that looks something like what we saw in England for so many years. The casual culture, not completely dead there, and I'm not going to say I know enough about it to really talk ill of what those firms were all about. But certainly don't need this kind of fighting and violence and organized groups getting together to hammer each other over a soccer game, or even remotely attached tangentially to a soccer game. We don't need that here in the United States. So thank you for being a soccer fan, Derek, but no thanks to your casual culture.